Heavenly Father, I pray for everyone watching this video right now. May you bless them with peace, joy, and breakthroughs in their lives. Amen. Hello, my wonderful family. I am so glad and grateful to have you here with me today. Your support means the world, and I truly don't take it for granted. Before we dive into today's powerful story, please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, drop a comment below to share your thoughts, and of course, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update from this channel. Burn it! The words sliced through the silence of the mahogany-paneled study like a blade. Maya Chin watched frozen as her father held the check, $99 million written in her grandfather's careful script, just inches from the crackling fireplace. "Dad, please," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. "Please what?" Her father's eyes blazed with 20 years of accumulated resentment. "Please let the ungrateful little princess walk away with everything while the rest of us get scraps?" Around the study, Maya's aunts and uncles formed a circle of faces twisted with greed and spite. Uncle Richard clutched a crystal tumbler, so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Aunt Patricia's perfectly manicured nails dug crescents into her palms. Even her own brother James stood with his arms crossed, jaw set in judgment. She was always his favorite, Aunt Patricia spat, her voice dripping with venom that had been brewing since Maya was 5 years old. Little Maya this, little Maya that. What did she ever do to deserve $99 million? The check trembled in her father's grip, the orange flames casting dancing shadows across the numbers that represented more money than most people would see in 10 lifetimes. Maya's throat felt like sandpaper. This couldn't be happening. Not like this. "I worked for that company for 15 years. Her father continued, his voice rising to a shout that echoed off the walls lined with her grandfather's books. "I gave him everything, my youth, my dreams. My marriage fell apart because I was always at the office trying to prove myself worthy of his approval. And he leaves it all to her." Maya felt tears burning behind her eyes, but something else stirred deep in her chest. A memory surfaced, her grandfather's weathered hands teaching her to play chess when she was 12, his quiet voice saying, "Maya, my dear, sometimes the most powerful piece on the board is the one everyone underestimates." "The will was clear," she managed to say, though her voice cracked. "Grandfather wanted." "Grandfather was a foolish old man in his final years," Uncle Richard interrupted, setting down his glass with a sharp clink. "Clearly not of sound mind when he wrote this ridiculous document." The flames danced higher, hungry and waiting. "Last chance, Maya," her father said, his tone suddenly cold and controlled. "Tear up this check yourself, and we'll split the inheritance equally among the family like it should have been. Or we'll do it for you, and you'll get nothing." Maya's chest tightened. The room felt like it was closing in, the faces around her blurring into a nightmare of greed and betrayal. These were people who had bounced her on their knees, who had attended her birthday parties, who had told her they loved her. But as she looked at their faces now, she saw the truth that had always been there, hidden beneath holiday smiles and forced family gatherings. They had never loved her. They had only tolerated her because they had to. 10 seconds, her father said, holding the check closer to the flames. Maya closed her eyes and thought of her grandfather's final words to her, whispered in the hospital 3 weeks before he died. "The real treasure isn't what they think it is, little chess master. Remember that." When she opened her eyes, something had shifted inside her. A calm she didn't expect settled over her shoulders like armor. "No," she said simply. Her father's face contorted with rage. "Then you've made your choice." He thrust the check into the flames. The paper caught instantly, curling and blackening as $99 million transformed into ash and smoke. The family watched in satisfaction as the numbers melted away, taking with them what they believed was Maya's future. And that's when Maya smiled. The smile started small, just a slight upturn at the corner of her lips, but it grew until it lit up her entire face. The family's triumphant expressions faltered, confusion creeping in like shadows at twilight. "Why are you smiling?" James demanded, stepping closer to his sister. "Do you have any idea what just happened?" Maya's mind drifted back to when everything changed, 6 months before her grandfather's death. She had been 25 then, working as a junior curator at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, living in a tiny Brooklyn apartment that she loved because she had earned it herself. She had always been the odd one in the Chin family, more interested in ancient artifacts than profit margins, more comfortable in libraries than boardrooms. Her grandfather, William Chin, had built his empire from nothing. At 83, he was still sharp as a surgical blade, still commanding respect in boardrooms across 3 continents. While the rest of the family scrambled for his attention and approval, Maya had simply loved him for who he was, not what he could give her. "Maya, dear, come walk with me," he had said that autumn afternoon when she visited him at the estate. The leaves were changing colors, painting the grounds in brilliant oranges and golds. They had walked in comfortable silence until they reached the garden gazebo where she used to do her homework as a child. That's when he had told her the truth about the family business, the real business that none of the others knew about. "Your father thinks I made my fortune in shipping and real estate," he had said, his eyes twinkling with a secret. "Your uncles believe it's all about the tech investments. They see only what I let them see." "What do you mean, grandfather?" He had pulled out a small leather journal, worn smooth by decades of handling. "What if I told you that every major decision I've made in the last 30 years has been guided by something far more valuable than market research or financial analysis?" Maya had listened, fascinated, as he revealed the existence of a network, a carefully cultivated group of brilliant minds across the globe who shared information, insights, and opportunities. Historians who could predict political upheavals based on historical patterns. Anthropologists who understood cultural shifts before they happened. Scientists whose research wouldn't be mainstream for decades. Knowledge, Maya. Real knowledge. That's the currency that never devalues. But the first betrayal had come even before his death. Maya's father had started visiting more frequently, bringing lawyers and accountants, pressuring the old man to update his will for tax purposes. Maya had watched her grandfather's health decline, not just from age, but from the stress of family members circling like vultures. "He's getting confused," her father had told her after one particularly tense visit. "Yesterday he was talking about some secret journal like he was living in a spy novel. We need to make sure his assets are protected from his fantasies." Maya had felt the first crack in her heart then, realizing that her father saw her grandfather's brilliant mind as something to be managed rather than treasured. Now, standing in the study as the ashes of the check settled in the fireplace, Maya remembered every slight, every dismissive comment, every time they had treated her grandfather like a senile old man instead of the genius he had always been. "I'm smiling," she said, her voice steady and clear, "because you just proved everything grandfather always said about all of you." Uncle Richard's face flushed red. "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" "It means," Maya said, walking calmly to her grandfather's desk and running her fingers along its polished surface, "that you destroyed a piece of paper and think you've won something." The confusion in the room was palpable. Aunt Patricia exchanged glances with her husband. James's confident smirk wavered. Her father stepped closer, his breath still smelling of whiskey and rage. "Maya, whatever game you think you're playing." "No game, Dad." She turned to face them all, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she was seeing them clearly. "Just the truth. The truth that grandfather spent his whole life teaching me, while you were all too busy being greedy to listen." The second hand on the grandfather clock ticked loudly in the silence. Maya could see the gears turning in their heads, the doubt beginning to creep in. "You're bluffing," James said, but his voice lacked conviction. Maya's smile widened. "Am I?" The truth was, Maya hadn't always been the confident woman standing in that study. For most of her life, she had been exactly what her family thought she was, the quiet one, the dreamer, the one who was too sensitive for the family business. She had learned early to make herself small, to avoid conflict, to let others take the spotlight while she found solace in books and museums. But everything changed the night her grandfather called her to his bedside, 2 weeks before he died. "Maya," he had whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of medical equipment. "I need to tell you something that will sound impossible." She had leaned closer, holding his frail hand in both of hers. "The real fortune, the one that matters, I've been transferring it to you piece by piece for the last 5 years. Maya's breath had caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" "The cryptocurrency wallets I helped you set up when you thought we were just playing with technology. The real estate investments we made together in your name when you thought you were just learning about property management. The shell companies where you're listed as the primary beneficiary." His eyes had grown intense, focused. "Maya, you're already worth more than the rest of them combined. They just don't know it yet." The revelation had been staggering. All those times she thought her grandfather was just spending quality time with her, teaching her about investments as a hobby, he had been quietly building her an empire. "But why?" she had asked, tears streaming down her face. Because you're the only one who ever loved me for who I am, not what I could give you. Because you have something they'll never have, integrity. And because, he had smiled with effort, you're the only one smart enough to handle what I'm really leaving behind. That's when he had told her about the network, about the journal, about the real source of his success. And he had made her promise to keep it secret until after the will was read, until after the family showed their true colors. Let them fight over the check, Maya. Let them reveal who they really are. And then, when they've burned their bridges completely, you'll know exactly who deserves your help and who doesn't. Now, 3 weeks later, watching their faces as doubt began to creep in, Maya understood the genius of her grandfather's plan. The $99 million check hadn't been her inheritance. It had been a test for the family. And they had failed spectacularly. You want to know what I did while you were all fighting over grandfather's will? Maya asked, pulling out her phone. I spent the last 3 weeks meeting with his lawyers. His real lawyers. Not the ones handling the public will, but the ones who've been managing the private trusts. Her father's face went pale. What private trusts? Maya tapped her phone screen, pulling up a banking app. The numbers that appeared made Uncle Richard's crystal glass slip from his fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor. The trusts that contain the real inheritance. The one he's been building for me since I was 20. Would you like to see the current balance? She turned the phone around, letting them all see the number. $847 million. The silence that followed was deafening. Aunt Patricia sank into one of the leather chairs, her face ashen. Uncle Richard stood frozen, staring at the broken glass at his feet as if it represented his shattered dreams. That's impossible, James stammered. Is it? Maya asked. Or did you all just assume that because I didn't fight for your attention, because I didn't play your political games, because I chose to build my own life instead of clawing for scraps from his table, that I wasn't worthy of his respect? Her father was still staring at the phone screen, as if it might change if he looked hard enough. This has to be fake. Some kind of digital manipulation. Maya laughed, a sound that held no humor, only profound sadness. Dad, even now, even with the proof right in front of you, you can't believe that your daughter might be worth something. The weight of 25 years of being underestimated, dismissed, and treated like a consolation prize crashed down on the room. Maya felt a power she had never experienced before. Not the power of money, but the power of finally being seen for who she truly was. The shipping companies? Mine. The tech investments? Mine. The art collection that you all thought was just his hobby? Mine. She slipped the phone back into her pocket. Even this house, the one you're all standing in right now, planning to sell to split the proceeds? Mine. Uncle Richard's legs gave out, and he collapsed into the nearest chair. William couldn't have, he wouldn't have. He wouldn't have what? Loved his granddaughter enough to secure her future? Trusted her with his legacy? Maya's voice remained calm, but underneath was a steel her family had never heard before. Or are you saying he wouldn't have been smart enough to see through all of your transparent attempts to manipulate him in his final years? The room erupted. This is fraud. Aunt Patricia shrieked, jumping to her feet. There's no way that girl could be worth almost $1 billion. William was being manipulated, probably by those gold-digging lawyers. Or by her, Uncle Richard added, pointing an accusatory finger at Maya. She was always hanging around him, filling his head with sob stories about how the family treated her. James stepped forward, his face flushed with anger and disbelief. Maya, I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but this is our family's money. Our inheritance. You can't just waltz in here and claim you've stolen it all. Stolen? Maya's voice remained dangerously quiet. By accepting gifts from my grandfather? By learning from him? By being the only person in this room who actually loved him? Her father had been silent through the outburst, but now he moved closer to Maya, his eyes calculating. She recognized that look. It was the same expression he wore when he was trying to close a difficult business deal. Maya, sweetheart, he said, his voice suddenly gentle, paternal. I think we're all just in shock here. This is a lot to process. Why don't we sit down and talk about this rationally? Maya almost laughed at the transparent manipulation. This was the father who had screamed at her 20 minutes ago, who had burned what he thought was her future while she begged him to stop. Now that he knew she held all the cards, he wanted to be reasonable. What exactly do you want to talk about, Dad? Well, family is family, right? Your grandfather was clearly unwell in his final years. Paranoid. He probably didn't understand the full implications of what he was doing. Her father's smile was the same one he used on difficult clients. But we can fix this. We can make sure everyone gets their fair share. Their fair share of what? Of the family wealth, of course. Look, I understand you were his favorite, and you deserve something extra for being such a devoted granddaughter. But $800 million? That's not just generous, it's irresponsible. Think about the tax implications alone. Maya watched her family nod along, seeing hope bloom in their faces as her father spun his web. They actually believed he could talk her into giving up the inheritance. They still saw her as the malleable little girl who used to hide behind her mother's skirts at family gatherings. "What are you proposing?" she asked. "A redistribution. Something fair. You keep, say, 50 million. That's more than enough to live comfortably for the rest of your life. The rest gets divided among the family according to our contributions to the business over the years." Aunt Patricia leaned forward eagerly. "That's very reasonable, Maya. Your father has always been so good with financial planning. And think about the family unity," Uncle Richard added, apparently having recovered from his shock. "Your grandfather would want us all to be taken care of, wouldn't he?" Maya looked around the room at their expectant faces. They were already mentally spending their portions, already planning how they would enjoy their windfalls. The same people who had just humiliated her, who had burned what they thought was her inheritance while she begged them to stop, were now asking her to voluntarily give them everything. "You know what?" Maya said slowly. "You're absolutely right." Relief flooded their faces. James actually smiled for the first time that evening. "Family is family," Maya continued. "And grandfather would definitely want everyone to be taken care of." "Exactly," her father said, his shoulders relaxing. "I knew you'd see reason. You were always such a smart girl." "Which is why," Maya said, pulling out her phone again, "I'm so glad he took care of all of you already." The smiles faltered. Maya scrolled through her banking app until she found what she was looking for. "Let's see. Dad, you received $3 million over the past 5 years through various bonuses and consulting fees that grandfather paid you above your actual salary." Her father's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "Uncle Richard, you got that $2 million loan for your restaurant that was quietly forgiven when it failed. Aunt Patricia, the $1.5 million for your daughter's wedding that you said was a gift but was actually an advance on your inheritance." She looked up at their stricken faces. "James, the car, the condo, the credit cards that grandfather paid off, about $800,000 total." The silence stretched taut as a piano wire. "He gave all of you exactly what you deserved over the years. He was generous, loving, and fair. The problem is, you were all so busy being resentful about what you weren't getting that you never bothered to appreciate what you had received." Aunt Patricia's voice came out as a whisper. "How do you know all this?" "Because he told me. Because unlike the rest of you, I actually listened when he talked. I paid attention to his stories, his lessons, his wisdom. While you were all scheming about how to get more from him, I was learning from him." Maya walked to the window, looking out at the garden where she and her grandfather had spent so many afternoons. "He knew exactly who each of you were. He knew Dad would burn my check because he's never been able to handle not being the center of attention. He knew Uncle Richard would go along with it because he's always been a follower. He knew Aunt Patricia would encourage it because she spent her whole life believing she deserved more than everyone else." She turned back to face them. "And he knew James would stand there and watch it happen because he's never had the courage to stand up for what's right." The accusations hit their targets with surgical precision. Maya could see the recognition in their eyes, the uncomfortable awareness that her grandfather had seen through them completely. "So here's what's going to happen," Maya said, her voice carrying an authority none of them had ever heard from her before. "You're all going to leave this house. Tonight. And you're going to think very carefully about whether you want to be part of my life going forward." "Maya, you can't be serious," James said, though his voice lacked conviction. "I've never been more serious about anything in my life." The room erupted again, but this time Maya was ready for it. "You ungrateful little bitch," Aunt Patricia screamed, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking completely. "After everything this family has done for you. What exactly has this family done for me?" Maya asked, her voice cutting through the chaos like ice. "Please be specific." "We loved you," Uncle Richard shouted. "We treated you like our own daughter." "You tolerated me," Maya corrected. "There's a difference. When I was 8 and wanted to show you my art project, you were too busy talking about stock options. When I graduated summa cum laude from Columbia, half of you didn't even come to the ceremony because it conflicted with a golf tournament." "That's not fair," James started. "When Mom died," Maya continued, her voice never wavering. I was 14 years old and terrified. Do you remember what you said to me at the funeral, Dad? Her father's face went pale. You said, well, at least now you'll stop being so dramatic all the time. Your mother encouraged that nonsense. Maya's eyes never left his face. My mother had been dead for 3 hours. The room fell deadly silent. Even Aunt Patricia's righteous indignation seemed to deflate. Grandfather was the only one who held me while I cried. The only one who made sure I ate dinner and did my homework and remembered that I was still a child who had just lost her mother. Maya's voice finally cracked, just slightly. So forgive me if I don't feel particularly grateful to the rest of you. Uncle Richard shifted uncomfortably. Maya, we were all grieving. No, Maya said firmly. You were all inconvenienced. There's a difference. She walked to her grandfather's desk and pulled out the leather journal he had left for her. The room watched in silence as she opened it to a page marked with a red ribbon. Do you want to know what grandfather wrote about each of you? She didn't wait for an answer. Richard, a good man who lacks the courage of his convictions, follows others because making his own decisions terrifies him, has never forgiven himself for the choices he didn't make. Uncle Richard's face crumpled. Patricia believes the world owes her something because she was beautiful once, measures her worth by what others have and what she lacks, will never be happy because she doesn't understand that happiness comes from within. Aunt Patricia sat down hard, as if the words had physically struck her. James, brilliant mind, weak character. Knows the right thing to do but rarely does it. Desperately wants to be loved but doesn't understand that love requires vulnerability. Maya's brother looked like he might be sick. And Dad? Maya turned to a different page. David. My son sees love as weakness and kindness as manipulation because he's afraid to admit he needs either one. His greatest fear is that he's not as important as he believes he should be. His greatest tragedy is that he's pushed away everyone who could have loved him unconditionally. Her father stood frozen, staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. But do you know what he wrote about me? Maya's voice softened. Maya sees the world as it could be, not just as it is. She has her mother's heart and her grandfather's mind. She will face terrible choices in her life, but I trust her to make them with integrity. She is my greatest achievement, not because of anything I taught her, but because of who she chose to become despite everything she survived. Tears were flowing freely down Maya's cheeks now, but her voice remained steady. He left me everything because he knew I would use it wisely. Not just the money, but the responsibility that comes with it. The network he built, the knowledge he accumulated, the power to make real change in the world. She closed the journal and looked at each of them in turn. You burned a piece of paper and thought you were destroying my future. But what you actually destroyed was any chance of being part of that future. The devastation on their faces was complete. Uncle Richard was crying openly. Aunt Patricia looked like she had aged 10 years in the span of an hour. James sat with his head in his hands. And her father just stared at her with something that might have been pride mixed with profound regret. Maya, he said quietly, No, Maya interrupted. You don't get to have a moment of clarity now and think it erases 25 years of emotional neglect. You don't get to hear that I'm worth almost $1 billion and suddenly decide I'm worthy of your respect. She walked to the door and held it open. All of you need to leave. Now. Maya, please, James said, standing up slowly. We're still family. Family doesn't destroy each other for money, Maya replied. Family doesn't stand by and watch someone they claim to love get hurt. Family doesn't treat love like a business transaction. One by one, they filed past her toward the door. Uncle Richard paused and looked like he wanted to say something, but Maya's expression stopped him. Aunt Patricia couldn't even meet her eyes. James stopped directly in front of her. I'm sorry, he whispered. For all of it. For not standing up for you. For being a coward. Maya's expression softened just slightly. I know you are, James. But sorry doesn't undo the damage. When her father reached the door, he stopped. For a long moment, they stared at each other, the successful businessman and the granddaughter he had never bothered to really know. He was right about me, her father said quietly. About all of it. Yes, Maya said simply. He was. Is there any chance, in the future, that we might? Maya looked at this man who had given her life but never really been her father, who had provided for her physically but left her emotionally orphaned, who was asking for forgiveness he hadn't earned and offering love that came 20 years too late. Maybe, she said finally. But not today. And not for a very long time. He nodded, understanding that this was more grace than he deserved. After they were gone, Maya stood alone in her grandfather's study, surrounded by his books and his memories and the weight of everything he had entrusted to her. For the first time in her life, she was completely, utterly alone. And for the first time in her life, she was completely, utterly free. The silence in the house was deafening. Maya walked through the rooms she had loved as a child, seeing them now through different eyes. Every family photo seemed to mock her. Images of holidays and birthdays where she had felt included, but now realized she had always been on the periphery. The little girl in those pictures had been desperately trying to earn love from people who were incapable of giving it unconditionally. She found herself in the kitchen, the heart of her grandfather's home, where she had spent countless hours learning to cook traditional Chinese dishes while he told her stories about their family's history. Now the copper pots hung silent, and the marble countertops gleamed unused. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her best friend Sarah. "How did the will reading go? Call me when you can." Maya stared at the message, realizing she had no idea how to explain what had just happened. How do you tell someone that your entire family had just revealed themselves to be strangers? How do you explain that you had inherited a fortune but lost a family in the same night? She scrolled through her contacts, looking for someone to call, someone who might understand. But as she looked at the names, she realized how isolated she had become. Most of her friends were work colleagues who knew her as the quiet curator who kept to herself. The few close relationships she had maintained were with people who had never met her family, who had no context for understanding the depth of what she had just experienced. The weight of her grandfather's expectations settled on her shoulders like lead. $800 million wasn't just money, it was responsibility. The network he had built, the knowledge he had accumulated, the power to influence global events through strategic investments and carefully placed information. He had spent his lifetime building something that could change the world, and now it was all hers. But she was 25 years old and had never managed anything more complex than a small museum exhibition. Maya sank into one of the kitchen chairs and allowed herself to feel the full magnitude of her loss. Not the family. She was beginning to understand that she had never really had them to begin with. But her grandfather, the one person who had truly seen her, understood her, believed in her potential. He was gone, and she was left to figure out how to honor his legacy while carrying the burden of knowledge that felt too vast for one person to handle. The journal lay open on the counter where she had left it. She flipped through pages filled with her grandfather's meticulous handwriting, observations about world leaders, predictions about market trends, analysis of cultural shifts that wouldn't become apparent to most people for years. This wasn't just a record of his thoughts. It was a roadmap for understanding how the world really worked. One entry caught her attention. Maya must understand that true power is not about controlling others, but about empowering them. The network succeeds because it serves something greater than individual ambition. When my time comes, she will face the temptation to use this inheritance for revenge or personal satisfaction. She must resist this temptation. The greatest leaders are those who transform pain into purpose. Maya closed her eyes, feeling the truth of his words. Part of her wanted to use her newfound power to hurt the family that had hurt her. She could destroy her father's business with a few strategic moves. She could ensure that Uncle Richard never found financing for another failed venture. She could make Aunt Patricia's social circles understand exactly what kind of person she really was. The temptation was intoxicating. But another part of her, the part her grandfather had nurtured and believed in, knew that revenge would only diminish her. It would turn her into the kind of person her family already was. Petty, vindictive, focused on settling scores rather than building something meaningful. Her phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. The caller ID showed her father's number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Maya." His voice sounded hollow, aged. "I know you said you needed time, but I couldn't stop thinking about what happened tonight." "What do you want, Dad?" "I want to tell you something I should have said years ago." He paused, and she could hear him taking a shaky breath. "I was jealous of you." Maya frowned. "What?" "Of the relationship you had with him. With my father. I spent my whole life trying to prove myself worthy of his respect, his pride, his love. And you just existed and he adored you. I resented that more than I ever admitted, even to myself." Maya felt a familiar ache in her chest, the same one she had carried since childhood, the desperate hope that maybe this time, maybe now, her father would finally see her clearly. "Dad!" "No, let me finish." Tonight, when I saw how he had provided for you, when I read what he wrote about you in that journal, I realized that he was right about me. I was so busy trying to earn something from him that I never stopped to give anything back. And I was so afraid of not being enough that I never saw how much you needed me to just be your father. The silence stretched between them, filled with 25 years of missed opportunities and unspoken pain. I don't know if you can ever forgive me, her father continued. I don't even know if I deserve forgiveness. But I want you to know that tonight, for the first time in my life, I'm proud of you not because of what you have, but because of who you are. Your grandfather was right. You are his greatest achievement. Maya felt tears burning in her eyes again. This was what she had wanted to hear her entire life: acknowledgement, pride, unconditional love from the man who had given her life. But it came too late, tainted by the knowledge that it took nearly $1 billion to make him see her worth. Thank you for saying that, she whispered. Maya, is there any chance we could try again? Start over? She looked around the empty kitchen, feeling the weight of her inheritance and her isolation pressing down on her from all sides. Part of her wanted to say yes, to grab onto this offered connection and hope that this time things would be different. But another part of her, the part her grandfather had trained to see clearly, knew that real change required more than words and good intentions. I don't know, she said honestly. I really don't know. After she hung up, Maya sat in the silence for a long time, wrestling with the most difficult decision of her life. She could forgive them, take them back, try to rebuild the family relationships she had always craved. Or she could stand alone, strong and independent, but isolated from the only people who shared her history and her blood. Either choice would define not just her future, but the kind of person she would become. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed midnight, marking the end of the most devastating day of her life and the beginning of whatever came next. Maya didn't sleep that night. Instead, she spent the hours before dawn reading through her grandfather's journal, trying to understand the full scope of what he had built and what he expected her to do with it. The network was vast and intricate. Economists in Geneva who could predict currency fluctuations months in advance, anthropologists in Tokyo who understood cultural shifts before they became trends, historians in London who could see the patterns that repeated across centuries. Her grandfather had spent 40 years cultivating these relationships, sharing information and resources to create a web of knowledge that gave him an almost supernatural ability to anticipate global changes. But it wasn't just about making money. Maya found pages upon pages of charitable investments, strategic donations, and carefully orchestrated interventions that had prevented conflicts, supported emerging leaders, and channeled resources toward solving world problems. Her grandfather had been playing a game so complex and long-term that most people couldn't even see the board. And now it was her turn to play. As the sun rose over the estate, Maya made her decision. She called Sarah first, knowing she would need at least one person in her corner who understood her as she really was, not as the heiress she had suddenly become. Maya, thank God you called. I've been worried sick. How did it go? Maya laughed, the sound carrying both exhaustion and relief. It's been complicated. Are you free today? I need to tell you some things that are going to sound impossible. Of course. Come over whenever you want. Actually, could you come here? I need to show you something. 2 hours later, Sarah stood in the study where everything had happened, staring at Maya's phone screen with the same expression of shock that had been on her family's faces the night before. This is real, Sarah whispered. You're actually rich? Rich doesn't begin to cover it, Maya said. But that's not the important part. The important part is what comes with it. She explained about the network, about the responsibility, about the choice she was facing between revenge and redemption. Sarah listened without interruption, her expressions shifting from disbelief to concern to something approaching awe. Maya, this is incredible. And terrifying. And, God, I can't believe your family burned that check. The thing is, Maya said, I'm starting to understand that they did me a favor. If they had been kind about it, if they had welcomed me into their fold and treated me with respect, I might have felt obligated to share everything with them. I might have let them influence how I used this inheritance. And now I know exactly who they are. And I know exactly who I want to become. Maya's phone buzzed with another call from her father. She let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message. Maya, it's me again. I know you need space, but I can't stop thinking about what happened. I've been awake all night, and I think I understand now what my father was trying to teach me. About love, about family, about what really matters. Please call me when you're ready. I love you. Sarah watched Maya's face as she listened. What are you going to do? I'm going to give them a chance, Maya said slowly. But not the chance they want. Over the next 6 months, Maya quietly revolutionized the way her grandfather's fortune was managed. She liquidated the traditional investments and redirected the money toward sustainable technology, educational initiatives, and humanitarian projects. She reached out to the network her grandfather had built and began to understand the true scope of what was possible when brilliant minds worked together toward common goals. But most importantly, she established the William Chin Foundation for Family Reconciliation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping families heal from financial trauma and learn to rebuild relationships based on love rather than money. Her family members became her first test cases. Uncle Richard was struggling with his third failed business venture when Maya approached him with an offer. Not money, but something more valuable, a chance to understand why he kept failing. She connected him with business mentors from the network, therapists who specialized in financial anxiety, and opportunities to volunteer with startup incubators where he could use his experience to help others avoid his mistakes. It took him 8 months to swallow his pride enough to accept the help. It took another year for him to understand that Maya wasn't trying to fix him. She was trying to help him fix himself. Aunt Patricia was the hardest case. Her resentment and entitlement ran so deep that she initially refused any contact with Maya at all. It wasn't until her husband left her, taking half their assets and leaving her to face the reality of her financial situation, that she reached out. Maya's response was unexpected. Instead of offering money or advice, she invited Patricia to join her on a volunteer trip to rural Cambodia, where they spent 3 weeks building schools and working with families who had nothing but were rich in love and community. I don't understand, Patricia said on their last night there, sitting on the porch of their modest guest house and watching children play in the street with toys made from discarded materials. These people have nothing, but they seem so happy. They have everything that matters, Maya replied. They have each other. It was the beginning of a slow, painful, but ultimately healing conversation about what Patricia had been searching for her entire life and why she had never found it. James was the easiest to reach and the hardest to heal. He understood intellectually what he had done wrong, could articulate his mistakes and express genuine remorse, but breaking his pattern of passive complicity required him to fundamentally change who he was. Maya didn't push him. Instead, she offered him a job, not in her financial empire, but in the foundation. Starting at the bottom, working directly with families in crisis, learning to recognize the signs of dysfunction he had lived with his entire life. Why are you doing this? He asked during one of their monthly check-ins. Why are you helping people who hurt you? Because, Maya said, hurt people, and healed people heal people. I can't change what happened to us as children, but I can try to prevent it from happening to other families. Her father was the most complex case of all. For the first year, Maya maintained minimal contact with him. Polite but distant responses to his increasingly desperate attempts to reconnect. She watched from afar as he struggled with the reality of what he had done, as his business suffered from the stress and distraction, as he began attending therapy and support groups for parents estranged from their children. The breakthrough came when he sent her a letter, not asking for forgiveness or offering explanations, but simply sharing what he was learning about himself and apologizing for specific moments from her childhood that he had finally recognized as harmful. I remember when you were 7, he wrote, and you brought me a drawing you had made of our family. I was on an important business call, and I waved you away without looking at it. You left it on my desk, and I found it later that night. You had drawn yourself standing apart from the rest of us, smaller than everyone else, with tears on your face. I threw it away because it made me uncomfortable. I didn't want to see that my daughter felt like an outsider in her own family. But throwing it away didn't make it less true. It just meant I chose my comfort over your pain. Maya cried when she read that letter, not just for the 7-year-old girl who had tried so hard to connect with her father, but for the man who had been so damaged by his own childhood that he couldn't see his daughter's need for love. Their reconciliation was slow and careful, built on foundations of honesty rather than obligation. Her father had to prove, through years of consistent behavior, that his change was real. Maya had to learn to accept love that came with conditions and limitations, to find peace with a relationship that would never be what she had dreamed of as a child, but could still be meaningful and real. 3 years after the night they burned the check, Maya hosted Thanksgiving dinner at her grandfather's house. Uncle Richard came with his new girlfriend, a kind woman who loved him for his gentle heart rather than his business prospects. Aunt Patricia brought stories from her work with refugee families and a humility that made her beautiful in a way her youth never had. James brought his own children, determined to break the cycles of emotional neglect that had defined their family for generations. And her father came alone, but not lonely. He had learned to find worth in himself that didn't depend on external validation or financial success. As they sat around the table that had witnessed so much pain and dysfunction, Maya felt her grandfather's presence in the room. Not as a ghost or a memory, but as a living influence that continued to shape how she understood love, family, and responsibility. "I want to propose a toast," she said, raising her glass. "To Grandfather, who taught us that the most valuable inheritance isn't money, it's the wisdom to know what truly matters." They drank to that, this broken family that had been rebuilt not through denial or forgiveness alone, but through the hard work of becoming people worthy of each other's love. Later that evening, as Maya sat in her grandfather's study reading from his journal, she found an entry she had never seen before, written in the margins of the last page. Maya will face a choice between power and love, between justice and mercy, between the family she was born into and the family she chooses to create. I pray she will have the wisdom to understand that the greatest victory is not in conquering your enemies, but in transforming them into allies. The greatest wealth is not in what you accumulate, but in what you inspire others to become. Maya smiled and closed the journal. Tomorrow she would begin working on her next project, a global initiative to address childhood emotional neglect and its long-term impacts on families and communities. The network her grandfather had built would help her reach every continent, touching millions of lives through research, education, and intervention programs. But tonight, she was simply a granddaughter who had learned to transform her inheritance of pain into a legacy of healing. The grandfather clock chimed 10 times, marking another day in a life that had become exactly what her grandfather had always believed it could be: meaningful, purposeful, and rich in all the ways that truly mattered. Outside, snow began to fall on the garden where she had learned her first lessons about love and patience, and the difference between what people want and what they actually need. Maya Chun, billionaire, philanthropist, and family reconciliation specialist, was finally home.